owls and owls and owls and owls and owls and owls and owls. It's time to have an owl. It's my ninja owl. I've been ninjaing my owl. Can you see my owl? I bet you can't see my owl. Can you see anything? Possibly not. Anyway, I am just doing my sound check, making sure everything is working correctly. You never know. Always got to be careful about technology. Sound seems to be coming through, which is good. So I'm going to pop out my earplugs and we're going to talk about passive perception. I should have done this video a very long time ago, and I am going to apologize that I took so long to actually talk about passive perception. Passive perception, I have lots of videos on stealth, I have lots of videos on everything else, and yet this is one of the most complicated concepts in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So you will find the start time for this video down in the description once YouTube publishes it. I will do that. Make sure, I always usually make sure to put the start time in there, okay, as soon as YouTube has published it and I'm awake. Now, if you haven't been part of my live streams before, normally what I do with my live streams is I present everything first and then I open it up for questions and answers. So today is the basics of passive perception. I really dislike talking about passive perception because it is so complicated. Many people don't think it is, but trust me, it really is. Hi dear Jesus, how's it going? Alright, so let's get cracking into this. I've been waffling along for the last minute and a half. Okay, let's talk about passive perception. I'm going to start. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. And as it happens, we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e. And the first thing I want you to do is, well, we're going to talk about passive perception. That's right, passive perception. Now, if you turn to page 175 and 177, the vast majority of passive perception is included in the player's handbook on those pages. What I'm going to say right now is when it comes to passive perception and the player's handbook, it is extremely poorly organized. It will confuse you. You will tear out your hair. You will think that you are going insane. And that is nothing to do with you. You are not stupid. It is just that the designers of the game didn't really put together the concept of perception, stealth, and passive perception in such a way that it's easy to understand. Hence why it's so complicated. So today I'm going to talk about what passive perception is, how to calculate passive perception, what it represents, and also the purpose of passive perception. And as always, I'm going to demonstrate with maps, miniatures, and dice, as I normally do. So let's have a breakdown of what passive perception is, shall we? Now, passive perception is a check, and it's a special ability check that doesn't involve any kind of dice rolling whatsoever. That's right, no dice get rolled. It is the most commonly used passive check. There are other types of passive checks, but passive perception is the most common check you can have in the game for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. And the reason being is that perception is essentially the super skill. It is the skill that will change the course of your game consistently. If you don't have a really good perception skill, what tends to happen is your party walks into bad things. So that means if you have passive perception and it's high, the chances are you're less likely to walk into really bad things. Hence, that's the whole concept behind using it, right? And having it. Okay, so how do you actually calculate passive perception? You will find that that is 10 plus your perception modifier. Now, your perception might be modified by your wisdom, always, yes. Wisdom score is going to be wisdom modifier, but if you are proficient, if you are trained in perception, you'll also get your proficiency modifier. So that means that if you are proficient or trained, that'll be 10 plus your wisdom modifier plus your proficiency bonus. If you're not proficient and not trained in perception, then it's just going to be 10 plus your wisdom modifier. Now, Here's the problem. There are other modifiers that can be added to that, and I can't give you a breakdown all of that. I can't break down every single little modifier that could be included from magic items, spells, and everything else. What does it represent? It can represent a few different things and has different purposes for the Dungeon Master and the players. And here's a couple of things I want you to consider when you look at passive perception. The average dice roll, if a task is done repeatedly. So that's what passive perception is supposed to duplicate. But it's not the only thing, okay? The average dice roll you could achieve if the task is repeatedly done, like searching for a secret door for 10 minutes or 1 minute or 2 minutes or something like that, when you do something for a period of time. So that's one representation of passive perception. But there's another one which is not exactly the same. Okay, the chance for a character or a monster to notice clues, find traps, follow tracks, detect secret doors, spot a danger, or other kinds of creatures. So it's working around that concept as well. This is where it starts to get really complicated, because the reason for passive perception is where it really starts to make it more complicated. What does passive perception represent? It represents that the character or monster is taking regular scans of their environment. That means that they are on edge all the time for threats of danger of some kind, whether that's a threat, a hazard, a danger, creatures that might attack them. It's trying to duplicate the idea that you are always looking for some sort of trouble, rather than waiting for the player to say, my character wants to make a perception check or check the area for danger, and then the Dungeon Master says, okay, roll a perception check, or the Dungeon Master rolls a perception check. So it's trying to duplicate that idea. Perception can include all of the senses, so that is sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. Now, I've done a video on perception, and you're welcome to go and check that out if you want to, and it covers all of that in quite a lot of detail. So that's what passive perception is trying to duplicate and represent in the game of Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so what is the purpose of passive perception in Dungeons and Dragons? Why don't we just roll dice rather than have this thing that we use that does not actually involve any kind of dice rolls? Why would you even have it in the first place? Well, its general purpose has been stated by the designers as a way of speeding up the gameplay. Because every time you roll dice, you slow the game down, and we don't want to slow the game down. We want to keep it nice and quick and fast and get things done. So it's supposed to speed up gameplay. It's also supposed to reduce the number of dice rolling done by the players and by the Dungeon Master, as it happens. Why would we want to do that? Well, again, it goes back to speed of play, but it's also to reduce the amount of dice rolls that the Dungeon Master has to make and the players have to make. So it's just generally trying to reduce the amount of workload that you have, make things a little bit easier for everybody. Okay, now this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky for people to understand, and that is the key reason for doing it is not just to simplify the game of Dungeons and Dragons, which obviously it can do, but it's to stop players metagaming their perception checks when they roll dice. So every time a player gets asked, okay, make a perception check, they pick up the dice, they roll the 20-sided dice, they add their perception modifier to that comes out with a score. If they see they get a really low score, then they're probably going to I'm probably not going to notice anything. And you can say, well, I'm a really good player and I would never do that sort of thing. But you can tell whether you've kind of screwed the pooch. If you roll low, you're probably not going to notice something, even though you know that there probably might be something there, but you know that your character has rolled really low. So this is what metagaming is all about. Whereas when you roll really well on the 20-sided dice, you roll a high number and add your perception modifier to that. Okay, when you're making a roll like that, you can tell you've probably done pretty well, and the chances are you don't need to worry too much because you'll pick up whatever danger or threats, if there are any around, you'll pick them up. So it's really to try and stop players metagaming perception checks. And because perception checks are such a common dice roll to make, it happens a lot. There is another possibility that some people may or may not consider, and that is, what about the Dungeon Master? Is it going to stop the Dungeon Master from metagaming? Probably not. I think that's rather unlikely. It might change things a little bit, but not a lot. Okay, it's not going to change really if the Dungeon Master decides to metagame, and the players will probably never know if the Dungeon Master metagamed in some way. And I know the statement from a few people is going to be, Fred, Dungeon Masters can't metagame. But actually, Dungeon Masters can metagame, but we will save that for a discussion another day. Now, but as I said, the main purpose, speed up gameplay, and really to reduce metagaming by all involved. Okay, so what is the deal with how this passive perception works? Well, the concept is that you are going to take that passive perception and you're going to compare it to a DC or difficulty class or some sort of opposed stealth skill check that would be performed by like a creature or a monster. So with regard to something like a DC or difficulty class, your Dungeon Master will relate this to something that's usually a static item like an object or something that doesn't move. It doesn't have the ability to sort of change its ability to be hidden. So objects and environments usually will involve a DC or difficulty class. Now 5 being very easy, 10 being easy, 15 being moderate, okay, 20 is hard, 25 is very hard, and 30 being near impossible. So those will relate to trying to find treasure and secret doors and secret notes and a variety of other things, maybe finding tracks on the ground, things that don't change the way they operate. Okay, when it comes to a stealth check, passive perception being compared with a stealth check, that means we're dealing with a contest of some kind. This is an opposed contest between either monsters or creatures and characters of some kind. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a very shortly. Now, the idea is that your passive perception must be equal to or greater than the DC or the stealth skills check to actually notice something. To actually notice it, it must be equal to or greater than. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the pre-generated characters from the Dungeons & Dragons 5e starter set, and I'm going to lay out you a scene. This scene is pretty common, right? We've got a whole bunch of goblins. They're hiding in the bushes here in various locations. Got a group over here, some hiding behind the trees here, a few over in the bushes here. They're all hiding, okay? We're going to make a stealth check for them very shortly, and they're trying to ambush our player characters. We've got a fighter here, we've got a rogue, we've got a cleric, and we've got a wizard. Now, we already know what the passive perception is for each of those characters because I've written them down. The fighter is a 13, the cleric is a 13, the wizard is a 13. I know this is not a very good example because there's a lot of 13s involved. Bear with me, somebody's a little bit different. The rogue gets a 10. Not really, it's a kind of strange, I know, but those are the passive perceptions for those characters. They are traveling along the road. The assumption is that they are expecting there might possibly be trouble, so they need to keep a lookout as they are walking or traveling the road, just in case they step in a hole or are ambushed by creatures, and in this case, they might be ambushed by the goblins. But for the goblins to be successful, they must score higher, okay? They must score higher than the passive perception of our characters. That's the concept behind the contest. So I'm going to roll that 20-sided dice in a second, and I'm going to add a 6. That's the modifier for the stealth check. Okay, so the stealth modifier for our goblin is a 6. I roll this dice, and whatever I get then determines the result. And I have to get higher than the passive perception of our characters. Otherwise, we are not going to be successful in hiding. Okay, here we go. Here's our first example. I rolled a 15, I add 15 to 6. That gives me a grand total of, what would that be? I think that's a 21. All right. So I'm adding my 6 from my stealth modifier. So 21 is definitely, it's bigger than the 13s, and it's bigger than the 10. That means that the goblins will get the drop on our player characters. They are hidden. They are hiding. They are not noticed in some way. Okay, that's the concept behind it. It's really just to ensure that only one dice roll is required, rather than having all the players roll a dice and then metagame, and then have the Dungeon Master roll their dice and then compare all the results. That's the only reason really why it's there. Okay, no other reason. Okay, so that is pretty much covered it. I will do one other dice roll so that you can sort of see. I don't know if I'll necessarily get a roll that's really low, but I'll roll it one more time. Now I got a really high score, so here I want to do is I want to sort of change things up. I'm going to deliberately move the dice so you can see slightly different scores. So I've got the 6. And what I want to try and do is I want to separate the group. So some of them are going to notice things and some of them won't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my dice roll here. Instead of an 18, I'm going to move it and going to adjust it down a little bit. Just a fraction, just a smidge. Okay, so let's say we get, there we go. That is 6 plus 5. So I rolled a 5 on my dice, or I pushed it over to a 5. So that's a total of 11. For the stealth modifier on our goblins. Now, as we know, they have to get greater than. They can't get equal to or less than. They must get greater than to be hidden. So that means that the fighter has definitely spotted them. The cleric definitely noticed them. Our wizard has got a 13, definitely noticed them. But the rogue is unaware that they are in that location. So it can change within the party. You can have members with passive perceptions, with some of the party being unaware of what's going on and some of the party being aware of what's taking place. Okay, that is the gist of passive perception. Hopefully I've covered in enough detail that you understand exactly what's going on, but it's all right because I will do future videos on passive perception, but they will be much more involved, much more complicated. Alright, so if you found this video helpful or informative, please share and like the video. Consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos such as live streams, and I do this quite a lot, and edited videos. If you want to support my channel, you did so by watching this video. Thank you very much. I have hundreds more videos, plenty of videos on the basic rules, videos for Dungeon Masters, videos for players. You're welcome to check them out. I don't do Patreon, but I do have affiliate links down in the description where you can buy stuff from Amazon and the book depository. I get a small commission. You pay exactly the same price, and that helps support me to continue doing videos like this. Now, this is your opportunity. Ask your questions, give your feedback, give your poses. You can disagree with me. You can say hi, or you can say bye. That's all fine with me. And if you're not part of the live chat, make sure those fingers are moving fast, people. Then use your comment section. That's what YouTube's provided it for, so there it is. Go and use it. Hey, thank you for everybody who showed up. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. I just need to drink some water, and then I will have a discussion with people about the unholy passive perception, the one and only most confusing and annoying mechanical aspect of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Everything else is fine, but that one not so fine, and of course stealth is definitely in there somewhere as well. Okay, alright, so back to the screen and the table, and let's have a discussion. I'll have a look in the chat and we'll work through your questions. Right, dear Jesus, I've already said hi to you. Scott, how's it going, Scott? Greetings. All right, dear Jesus, going insane because of passive perception. Been there, done that, laugh out loud. Look, It took me so long to understand passive perception, and I had to explain it to a lot of dungeon masters back in 2014. How it actually worked took me ages. Right, how's it going, Matt? How you doing? All right, dear Jesus, Rogue in my group has a passive perception of 19. Oh my. And it was hard to choose when to use it. Observant feet is very effective. Yes, it is. One of the things I will say about passive perception, I'm going to tie myself up a little bit here, but the observant feat is very, very effective. The only problem is that some players won't understand that passive perception is a dungeon master tool. It is one of those tools that can literally be removed from play. If the dungeon master doesn't want to use it in a particular situation and wants dice to be rolled, they can do that. They don't actually have to use it. I mean, it's the case with most rules in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but it does actually stipulate that the dungeon master can choose to use that or not use that, really. And I really want to sort of highlight that issue, because I know a lot of people get really confused about, I don't understand why I can't use my passive perception every single time. In some situations it might not be appropriate. But if you're going to do that as a dungeon master, if you're not going to be using passive perception in your game at all, make sure you tell your players not to take the observant feat, or at least let them change it out if you're going to do something like that. Okay, so here on page 175, and it says here, this is basically about passive checks, okay? And I've talked about passive checks. I've got a video on the topic as well. A passive check is a special kind of ability check that doesn't involve rolling dice. We've already covered that, right? Such a check can represent the average. Now, so such a check doesn't have to, can represent the average result for a task done repeatedly, such as searching for secret doors over and over again. Or it can be used by the DM or dungeon master, okay, when the DM wants to secretly determine whether the characters succeed at something without rolling dice, such as noticing hidden monster or monsters. Really, what that is saying is that, from my understanding and from what I read it, is it's a dungeon master tool. It is something the dungeon master can take or leave if they want to. Now, it is very much baked into the stat blocks and the character sheet for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but it does sort of indicate to me that it's one of those things that you as a dungeon master don't have to use. I know a lot of people have trouble with that, and I certainly know there's a few players who've had issues with me with regard to this when I've been running public games. Thank you, Scott. I'm glad you think I did a great job. All right, dear Jesus, there was only a couple of times Lost Mine of Fandelver asked for passive perception on traps and other traps did not. Why the difference? Okay, so what you're asking for, dear Jesus, is really complicated. It would take me almost an hour to break down the reason for it. Sometimes passive perception doesn't apply because the timing doesn't work. Remember, part of the aspect is, one, it's designed to be used to hide the results from the player, and also it's to duplicate the concept that a passive perception is repeatedly looking in a location or trying to notice something, whether you smell or you touch or you listen or you see. So if there isn't time to actually do that, if the trigger would be so quick, then passive perception would not apply, and really it comes down to the player saying, I want to make a perception check, and then rolling a perception check. If you understand what I mean. Hopefully that's covered it, dear Jesus, but I will do a video in far more depth. Hi Matt, how's it going? Hey Fred, I don't want to take your time if you have things to do. I'm alright, but I have a ton of questions. Okay Matt, fire away. Unrelated. You know me, man, I will answer questions that are unrelated. So fire away. Mystic Realm 3D printable table gaming terrain. Greetings, folks. Hey, how's it going? Is it Fred or is it Jenny? Is it Jennifer or Freddie? Frederick. Sorry, not Freddie. I hate being called Freddie. God, it drives me nuts. Mystic Realm does really nice looking printed terrain plans. Not the actual printed terrain, but the plans. It's related. Matt, okay, far away. Get those fingers moving, Matt. He's waving at dear Jesus. Okay, what do you got here? Passive checks remind me of Pathfinder taking a 20. Okay, so it's not so much like that. So your passive check has been ported over from Dungeons & Dragons 4E. I know a few of you are going to just freak out when you hear that. Okay, it was a common mechanic used in Dungeons & Dragons 4E, the 4th ed edition of the game. They had a mechanic called taking 20, and they had a mechanic called taking 10. And that was kind of the concept behind it. Pathfinder taking 20 is actually quite different. So what would happen with taking 20 is that you are not requiring a dice roll, and you are just taking the modifier for that person's skill and adding 20. That's what taking 20 means. Whereas a passive check is much more like taking 10, where you add 10, okay, the average you expect from a 20-sided dice roll, add 10 to whatever your perception modifier is. So it's more related to a taking 10 than taking 20. With taking 20, if you wanted to use something like taking 20 in the game of Dungeons & Dragons, and I probably should do a video on the topic at some point, my suggestion is just apply it. Don't even make it open to players. If the players describe a situation or something they're doing and the situation sort of indicates that it's a waste of time in rolling dice or using a passive check, just use the concept of I'll add 20 to whatever your modifier is, and that's it. Oh, I knocked something over. All right. Okay, I'm just going to rub this out. Matt is quickly writing down questions. Either that or he's not. I'm going to disappear very shortly if I don't see any more feedback through the live chat. I know it takes time to sort of catch up with everybody because I've got a latency on it. But look, I don't want people to freak out. This video was just supposed to be the beginning of things. Yeah, one quick question, dear Jesus. I will do a really advanced passive perception video, something that will break down things and give you lots of meat and juicy bits. All of the tricky things that are hard to figure out. Mamma mia. I mean, I guess you got to understand the rationale behind something like the perception check, and which is why, to a large extent, players will metagame, even if they don't think they're metagaming. It's because it's so powerful. Okay, what do you got here? If someone fails a lock-picking check, do they get to try till they succeed? Now, I know where you're going with this, dear Jesus. Yeah, it's a good question. And yet another video I need to make. Okay, so here's the thing. If you allow them to continue to make checks, then why are you bothering having them roll dice in the first place? Because all they've got to do is just keep rolling till they get a 20, right? So maybe you're better off, dear Jesus, and using the taking 20 mechanic that was used back in Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, Pathfinder, and Dungeons & Dragons 4E. Maybe just add 20 to whatever their modifier is. But are you the sort of dungeon master that applies some sort of penalty? So if they score a 1 on their 20-sided dice roll, does that mean the lockpicks break? Is that going to cause that sort of problem? Because the only reason that a player will continue to roll dice because they have failed the lockpicking check is because they know they have failed the lockpicking check, and they can see the dice number on their dice. If you just say, okay, you roll this, and well, this is what you try picking it, but that's as good a score as you can get. So a lot of people don't allow for a second roll. If you're going to allow them to roll for a lock-picking check, you might find yourself in a situation where you just wind up having them roll and roll until they finally succeed. Or you just forget about it and let them pass it and be done with it. Or you just take that one roll and that's their result. Okay? Does that make sense, dear Jesus? I know where you're going with this because I've had to deal with it myself. Hi Matt, what do we got here? I ran the Cragmore hideout and up to the Red Brand Ruffian encounter, but no one seems to want to talk to NPCs now. Do I get them to do so, or should I not be doing that? Matt, you can do whatever you like. You can do that if you want. If you feel that the players are not interacting with the NPCs and you want them to interact with the NPCs, then do that. If you want them to actually try to work for it a bit more and actually be the people that are moving the dialogue forward, okay, then do that. There's nothing in the game that says you absolutely have to do it a particular way. For me, it really comes down to how familiar are your players with Dungeons and Dragons. If they are veterans, they've been playing for some time, they've been playing for a year or two, then they should know that they need to approach the NPCs and ask questions and develop a relationship. But maybe that's not what they're doing because they are quite new to the game and they don't understand that. If they're quite new to the game, Matt, they probably won't do that sort of thing. Okay, alright, hopefully that answered your question. Alright, dear Jesus, I had the lock break, so they needed to strong arm the door open. Well, that's another way. I mean, you don't have to have the tools break, you can have the lock break, and now they have to try to argy-bargy that thing open. I do know I've had a few players who have approached me and said, look, I want to unlock the pick, unlock the store with a dagger. A dagger is not a lock picking device, okay? And they didn't have any skill in it whatsoever. And that's asking rather a lot. So the only time I would allow that is if the lock is just about completely destroyed and a bit of sharp force or blunt force to it will probably pop it open. Does that make sense? Okay, Scott, do you find it ironic that wisdom classes like clerics are naturally more perceptive than the typical rogue, who should have a higher perception score? Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. In your opinion, I do find it amusing, and it's interesting that you can see the passive perceptions. You know, that means that the fighter has a perception score of 3, so has the cleric and the wizard, and yet the rogue has got 0. And that's just how that character was built. There are ways of actually solving that problem by building your character around that. But yes, it is a little bit odd. Okay, where else are we? Dear Jesus, at Matt, eventually they will encounter the Red Brand Ruffians if they walk around in town, since the Red Brands do not like adventurers. Yes, that's true. Very much so. So yes, you don't necessarily have to have the NPCs in the town approach the players. You will at some point decide just move on and deal with the Red Brands. The Red Brands can instigate things when you need them to. Okay. Matt, they are new. Yeah, that would explain it, Matt. That will explain why they aren't doing what you expect them to do. Okay. So my suggestion to you is just bring the Red Brands in. They'll get better at it, and it won't matter quite so much. One of my players is kinda OP, or is that just his class? Overpowered? I don't know. What is he playing that's so overpowered? There are so many classes in Dungeons and Dragons that can be overpowered. What do we got here? He's playing a ranger. Okay, so a ranger is good in some environments, not in all environments. I wouldn't say it's an OP class. I've seen much worse at the table when I've seen a whole table full of clerics. Trust me, you think a ranger is OP, you try dealing with an entire party full of clerics who have multi-classed, and oh my, that's much harder to deal with. I've seen groups that had 2 paladins. That's scary. The class that scares me the most as the dungeon master is the barbarian, because I just don't know how to knock those guys down. It's very hard to do that. The rage feature is very impressive. So yes, I wouldn't say that a ranger is OP. Maybe he's built it in such a way that it's well structured. I wouldn't worry quite so much about that. You know, when you've got new players, it's always good if you've got somebody who is trying to sort of push the envelope a little bit. Hopefully they'll pass their knowledge on to somebody else. Right, dear Jesus, at Matt, between Barthen's Provisions and the Stonehill Inn, you can have the NPCs approach them. Yeah, absolutely. Or if they go to the Sleeping Giant Tavern where Grista is, you can have them encounter the red brands there. But yes, play it out like an old western. Haha, it seems like the healing word spell makes all encounters less hard. Well, healing word does, but I would like to point out that although healing word can be done at range and it's very effective, somebody like a paladin has lay on hands, 5 points of lay on hands at level 1. That means they can touch 5 different characters or the same character 5 times if they wanted to, and whatever combination, and get them back on their feet with 1 hit point if they wanted to. No cleric can do that. No ranger can do that. They can cast spells at range that will heal their party members, and they don't get a lot of hit points back, but it still gets them back in the fight. So yeah, I wouldn't worry so much about healing word. You'll get better at this sort of thing. Don't worry so much about making your campaign challenging for new players. New players are better off to just let them just figure out the game. If you try to make things too interesting, it's going to be hard for them. They're going to make a few mistakes along the way. They won't know the rules fully. They won't have a good understanding of strategy. They're dealing with monsters they've never fought before. You know, when you're dealing with experienced players in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, a lot of them know the tactics and the mechanics of monsters, so they know what to expect. Yep. So don't worry about that. It's when they start getting higher in the levels, when you start dealing with the dragon and the black spider, Nesna the black spider, then you can start making things a bit more difficult. Then you can start applying things and worrying about whether things work out for you, whether you're making them hard enough for the players. But right now, you know, if they have selected healing word, good for them. Dear Jesus, what helps is to print out unlabeled map of Phandalin and show your players where they want to go around town. Yes, absolutely. Yep, print it out. And you could even print one out with the labels if you really want it on there. But there are plenty of maps of Phandalin that have no labels on them, and if you Google it, you will find them pretty quickly. Good point, dear Jesus, by the way. What else we got here? Dear Jesus. I set up encounters down every street for my NPCs to interact with or fight. So in other words, it's not always a fight, but it's some sort of interaction. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any more questions before I lose my voice, which is going to happen very, very shortly. As I said, don't freak out about me not covering everything on passive perception. This is just the intro video. What's that, Matt? Is it fine to go off the printed book? My friend has told me not to. You mean to not follow the book. Matt, you don't have to follow the printed book. Your friend has told you not to go off to stay with the book, but look, if you feel comfortable in moving away from the book text, then do that. A lot of the early adventures for Dungeons & Dragons 5e included sections where the Dungeon Master could include their own stuff. There were spaces left. Okay? Old Owl Well and Wyventor have no maps. A good indication that the Dungeon Master, if they need a map, can draw their own map. Okay, you can change things. You do not need to leave them exactly the way that somebody else has written them up. So by all means, if you feel comfortable, do that. And we're going to walk you through a lot of that sort of stuff anyway. I'll be doing more videos on the Lost Mine of Phandelver. So, dear Jesus, Mike's maps have player maps. Yep. If you find one of the videos on the Lost Mine of Phandelver, you'll find a link for Mike Shaley down there somewhere, and it will give you a link to his maps. They do cost money, but if you're looking for just a low resolution free map, just Google it on Google it on the internet. You'll find it. You're welcome, Matt. Okay, I'm going to have a drink of water, and I think that is a good indication that it's time to finish up for the night. Okay, I just want to say that right now, for those of you who are used to seeing me do my my videos on my weekend, this weekend coming, I can't do any videos on the Lost Mine of Phandelver or Dungeon Master Guides or anything else. I can't do any crafting or painting because I will be working. I have training, and it also means because I won't have any prep time, the chances are you won't see any live stream videos from now through to about, I think it's Easter Friday in New Zealand. So I know that's like a week and a half. I know that's a long time. There will be another video this week, possibly, on teamwork. I've been planning to do it for ages. I just don't know if I will have it ready in time. So just assume that this is the last one, unless I get organized enough and I get my teamwork video organized before I have to go on my training. Okay? All right. You are welcome, Scott, and I will see you later, Matt. And dear Jesus, thank you for your very good advice and your questions, and thank you for everybody who showed up. It's time to go to bed, right? I will see you later. Oh, and Mystic Realm, thank you for showing up. It's been a while. So have a good night, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever it is. Look after yourself, look after your family, and I'll see you later.